So y'all haven't really heard about what I've been reading, so I just kind of figured I'd tell you about it. Just casually, you know. Hello, and welcome to my channel. My name is Pete, and this is the Ponderings of Pete. Not to be pretentious, but I don't know, I like the sound of it. If this is your first time here, drop a like, a comment. I mean, everybody drop a like and a comment. Like, you know, if you've read these books, all that other jazz. Subscribe if you wish to see more. And I appreciate each and every one of you who watches, who comments, and interacts. You're all awesome. And even you, random viewer, who has never commented before. You too are awesome, I promise. Now, what did you come here for today? What did the title say? This is a weird quarterly wrap-up. January, February, and December, which will actually be first. Just, you know. Because chronologically things exist, we think. If the background changes behind me, I mean it will, not if. When it does, don't freak out. You probably wouldn't freak out, but essentially, I was filming a December-January wrap-up, and I lost half the footage for some odd reason, don't know how. And so we get this. So I figured by the time I was editing it, I was like, might as well just add in February as well. And that's what I'm doing. So we're having a 3-month wrap-up. So let's start off with December. End of the year. What did I read? Well, mostly I read the last 3 books. That's right, the last 3 books of the Books of Babel. I read about half of Arm of the Sphinx in October, and then I finished the last half in, what was the month again? December. And so, yeah, I finished also Fall of Babel and The Hod King. And I kind of touched a little bit on it in my last video where I talked about the top 10 series, books, whatever of the year. And I'll kind of go in, let's see if I can go into a little bit more detail here. I think the thing that wasn't working for me when I picked up Arm of the Sphinx in October was that it was a lot more adventure pulp than the really theme-driven nature of the first one. There was, that adventure pulp nature to it, but the thing that really drew me in with Slighlty Sens was just the tower and the themes of the tower, the character of the tower. And I feel like Armor of the Sphinx leaned a lot more heavily into the adventure pulp stuff, and it showed you new locales, but it felt like it was more of the adventure pulp stuff than it was just like, wow, look at this terrible place that's shaping terrible people. That was there, but again, adventure pulp. I picked it up and I was like, you know what? It is going to be what it is going to be. And I had a lot more fun with it in that last half. And then I picked up The Hod King, and The Hod King felt like more of a return to the thematic elements of Slighlty Sens that was like, hi, this tower is a terrible place, and there's terrible things with the Hods, and it corrupts people, and these really cool things. And then we get to Fall of Babel, which I was also like, you know what? I'm still just gonna vibe with what it is. And Fall of Babel was a very good mix of the themes of the tower and the adventure pulp side of things that was really cool once I got into it. So I think overall I really love the themes of the tower the most, and that's why I really love the Hod King the most. I am not as salty about the ending as most people with Fall of Babel as well. And full warning, this isn't spoilers for the ending, but I will say the ending leans more into the adventure pulp side of the series than it does into the tower themes more than anything. So I wasn't as excited for it as the next person, but I also wasn't as disappointed by it as some of the people that really loved like the stuff in the Hod King. So I'm not in the camp that it was a terrible ending. I think it fit the series, but I also am not like, oh my gosh, it was an amazing ending. I'm smack dab in the middle of the road, which is the worst place to be. It's fine. I think the ending worked. I liked the ending, and I think it worked. That's what I'm gonna go with. That's the hill I'm gonna die on. I'm gonna die right in the middle of the valley instead of on the hills. It's fine. Another one I read was Making Money by Terry Pratchett. This is the second Moist Von Lipwig. I can't even say his name. This is the second Moist Von Lipwig book. And, I love this one. I don't think I loved it as much as Going Postal because I was kind of put off that I felt like we weren't following Moist as much as we did the first book. I felt like there's a lot more wibbly wobbly storylines going all over the place with this one. And we spent a lot of time with this guy who was obsessed with the patrician for some odd reason. And I was like, but I want Moist. I want him to mess with the banking system. And that was there. It just was, I wanted to be more of a focus. I think, yeah. But it was still really good. I think I definitely got a lot of I think the jokes were on point. And the whole concept of money and the kind of poking fun at the concept of money was just spot on. And I really liked it. And then the final kind of 2 short stories that I read in the month of December were 2 short stories by K.J. Parker, one of which I vividly remember and one of which has mostly faded from my memory. I went back and opened up the book and was like, wait, what was this one? And I remember reading the first, I looked at the first page and I'm like, I remember reading this. I don't remember the story at all. So the first one was really good and the second one was kind of So the first one was Small Price to Pay for Birdsong and the second one was A Rich Full Week. And the more that I think about it, I think I remember something about undead or something with the second one. But the first one was very, very visceral, very just hi, this is about the selfishness of human beings. And it was good. Really, it was one of the more profound Parker ones in the sense that I was like, what did I just read? And what did I just read? Dang, that was good. And then the second one was, again, forgettable. And that kind of wraps up December. So let's move on to this first month of the year. Let's talk about January. Let's talk about Fool's Fate by Robin Hobb. I was about to say I don't remember if I talked about this during my December wrap-up, but I don't remember if I talked about it during my November wrap-up because I don't remember when I did my November wrap-up. But I'm going to talk about it now. I did do a live show on Anita's channel. Really good. Check that out. It will be linked down below in the thingy thing. And yeah, let's just say it was really good, among other things. Fool's Fate was a beautiful ending to a 9-book arc of just amazingness. I have gone through so many highs, so many lows, so many emotions because Hobb is an excellent, excellent character writer. Seeing Fitz through his own eyes in this series was really good, really beautiful. I think she really set things up really, really well throughout the series as well and throughout the books. I saw things coming. I also, there were red herrings and, it was so cool just to see all the threads she was putting together. I did kind of find a lot of them, which I'm proud of myself for. But just, yeah, I think that's the limit of the ego pushing I'll put there. Because I don't feel comfortable with it. Anyways, it's just beautiful, right? And I will say this about Fool's Fate is that the falling action of it takes its time, right? After the big, fine, climactic pain and peak of the action, all that falls for plenty of pages. Let's just say that. I do wish that the falling action of Live Ship was a little bit more like this. And I don't know. Anyways, I won't complain about Live Ship here, but it's just beautiful. There were so many things that so many questions that I had from all the way back in Assassin's Apprentice that were now answered. And I understood it all. And all the threads came together. And I'm like, oh my gosh, you planned all this out. Oh my gosh, you're a genius, Hobb. It's amazing. And why do you have to hurt me like this? And that's Robin Hobb in a nutshell. Lots of stars, all the stars. Next up, we're going to talk about Tyrant's Law by Daniel Abraham. So, book 3, Dagger and Coin. And I will say at this point, I can really say, I definitely like LPU better. And I definitely like the second book better than I did this one. I think the characters are good. We have Cithrin, we have Getter that are amazing characters. We have Clara, who is also amazing. We have Marcus, who's kind of meh. Who else we got? We have an interesting magic system. And then we just have this random twist at the end, which is really cool, but also it's do you know what's happening with this series? Right? I think my main gripe with this book is in the middle of the book, there's a plot line that is kind of resolved in Marcus's story that kind of shows you a tone for the story that's focuses it more to grimdark or sword and sorcery stuff. And at the very end of the book, there's something else that happens that's no, actually, this is the epic fantasy that you all thought it was from the beginning. Or it was billed as from the beginning. Because big things are about to happen. world-changing things are about to happen. And you're like, this was feeling like Game of Thrones up until this point. This is simply just the thing that's been turning over in my mind with this book, so that's why I'm kind of talking about it a lot. Let's talk about the characters and what I liked about them. Getter is a really well-written character. He's a really well-written, pitiable character, and I love it. It's I see him and I'm like, wow, I'm glad I'm not you. He's really well-written. Hopefully I can talk about this with somebody at the end of this series, possibly your plans in motion. Clara, cool. From the second book, loved her. She's amazing. And I kind of felt like her and Sithrin, I felt like their storylines took too long to get going. Both of them felt like they were observing a lot. Sithrin more than Clara. Clara. Who knows? But once they did things, they did things. Sithrin in particular did a lot of it. Like Sithrin's like arc in a lot of these was like, sit, wait, observe, do something big. And then Clara is kind of like a slow build up to some stuff. And I really hope, like, some of the dynamics also changed. I'm like, oh, it's not going where I thought it was. So I do hope that Clara does a lot more in the coming books. But we will see. I just have to sit back and enjoy the characters where they're at. And that's really how you enjoy these books. Next up, we are going to talk about a book that you can see on screen already. Tress and the Emerald Sea, a.k.a. Secret Project 1 by Brandon Sanderson. First of the secret books that he wrote because he just can't stop writing. Overall, this was a phenomenal book, right? I am a Cosmere stan or whatever you want to call it. I enjoy Brandon Sanderson. I also enjoy Malazan and some other weird stuff. And it's fine to like all of it. I think Sanderson really focused on his writing here. Right, specifically the framing narrative, like the who was talking to you thing. It's not, is it technically point of view? It's essentially the storyteller, right? Because he's working at this with these books to figure out how he's going to write Hoyd's voice when he writes Dragonsteel, which that word is loaded for a lot of reasons. There's so many wobs and stuff that are behind that, but that's just me. Implications. First question. Is this a good book? Yes, it is a good book. It is whimsical. It is beautiful. The illustrations are great, even though there are some of the illustrations that kind of came off weird because the shading didn't entirely work with the way printers things did, printing on the page, but some of the illustrations are really good. The rest of the quality of the book is phenomenal. Like, this thing will last till Kingdom Come. It's great. What else we got? I really enjoyed the characters in the story. Our main character, Tress, was very lovable. Seeing Hoyd was interesting, per usual. That's about it. Next question. Is it a suitable entry point for a Cosmere person? Is it a suitable entry point to the Cosmere? This is one of the claims that Sanderson made. And, he said that Secret Projects 1 and 3 are suitable entry points. So it is my job to figure out if that's true. And to be honest, I would not make this the first Cosmere book. There are one or two that I would say, hey, you should try this one first. I still think Final Empire is a really great entry point. Stormlight Archive is kind of like the, okay, if you really want to entry point. And I think this one falls with Stormlight in the sense that it's a decent starting point. There are things you won't necessarily understand. I think the story beats will hit the same way. But there's definitely a lot in this book that will gain more meaning, but doesn't alter the way you experience the plot, if that makes any sense. Like, if you're not Cosmere aware, if you are just starting out the Cosmere, this is fine, but I would recommend something else. Because I think there is a particular element about one plot point that I would say gets better if you know what's happening, but not by much, if you get my gist. It's more about the implications of the plot point than it is about the actual like execution and happenstance of the plot point, and the things surrounding it. But that is my 2 cents. Speaking as someone who really loves just the Cosmere implications of everything. In like 2 months, we'll have the next one, which is, I don't actually remember the name because I didn't pay much attention to this one because it wasn't Cosmere. But we have the non-Cosmere book coming up, which I'm excited about because I won't have to talk about the implications. I mean, that's exciting and disappointing at the same time, but it's fine. All right, next up, we're going to switch over to some self-pub with A Touch of Light by Tiago Abdallah. I read this, and then I read the prequel novella, which was Prelude to Ashes last month. And by last month, I mean January in this case. Even though I'm filming this in March, I mean January. I read this stuff in January to emphasize, because we're still talking about January. I read Touch of Light, and then I read the prequel novella. I would actually recommend that you start off with the prequel novella, because I think that it offers a better introduction into the world more than anything. Yes, it takes place 100 years before, but because of the longevity of some of the people in this series, they're still there, right? So you still see the same character, or most of the same characters. So reading Touch of Light was a fun experience. I think the world that Tiago has created is wonderful and beautiful, and there's a lot of things revolving around death and people's opinions on death, and their beliefs on death. And a few things, this one kind of started out, in my opinion, this is my opinion, similarly to Malazan, not in all senses, but in the sense that it drops you in the middle of the world with a bunch of things going on, and you're kind of left to figure out a lot of the context of this, and your hand is not held throughout this experience. Unlike Malazan, I was able to figure out what was going on within the first book, because Malazan is a whole nother beast, but it was still very interesting to be figuring out. It was very just like cool to be putting together the puzzle pieces. The other thing that was very interesting to me about this book is his portrayal of the church, right? So this is a fantasy church. They worship something called the Seraph, which will eventually come at the end of all time and resurrect people whose bodies are intact. Minor spoiler for the religion. He writes this church as a very political entity. He does not write the church as the good guy. It is arguable that some of the characters within the church and the Pope are not good at whatsoever, right? And I think this is the first time that I've read a negatively portrayed church within a book or religious organization like this that is very close to, say, like the Catholic Church or something. That it's the first one that didn't seem pettily evil, right? Because I feel like when you have a harmful or evil church in a fantasy story, a lot of the perspectives that are shown are just like, oh my gosh, it's so evil. It's a religious organization. And they tend to be evil for evil's sake. And that's frustrating to me as someone who I'm not necessarily part of one of the huge denominations that is very, very organized. But I definitely feel like people are just hating on the church because they want to. So this didn't feel like just a shallowly written organization, if that makes any sense. And I appreciate that, right? Because it tuned into the whole like, oh my gosh, organizations can be easily manipulated for power's sake, right? And I get that. And it showed that. And it showed like the political machinations that the church was involved with, which is like, yeah, absolutely. That's cool. It's really cool. So I liked it. There's some really good battle scenes in this book. Just the death stuff in general is really interesting. And I'm looking forward to reading Shade of Madness this March. Yeah, I think I'm going to get to that after the current book I'm reading. Definitely getting into it in March. In January, I also read another KJ Parker short story, which was randomly published by like the Tor website. It was published on Tor's website. If I can find the link, I'll put it down below for you guys. But it is called Burning Books for Pleasure and Profit. There was very interesting themes in this one, definitely focusing on the character, which is what KJ Parker's writing is wont to do. That's just how it goes. Basically a dude that is given a really hefty book and he has to figure out what to do with it. I really enjoyed this one, right? It's definitely just, I enjoy the situations that he puts this character in and just the vibrancy of the world the vibrancy of the town he kind of builds within just like a handful of pages. I think he's really good at doing that and just showing you what you need to know and showing the character doing things. And then the very last book that I read for January was Tales of the Bounty Hunters by Miscellaneous Authors. This was written after Return of the Jedi, but before Phantom Menace came out. A lot of the stories take place between 5 and 6, or around the timing of the beginning of 6 with the Jabba's Palace escapades, if you want to call them that. There's this one shot in episode 5 where Darth Vader has a handful of bounty hunters on the bridge of a Star Destroyer. He's like, go get that Millennium Falcon. And they go. And these are their stories. Whether it's before, after, it interweaves. They're not, one of them is like the same completely. I like them. I especially like the Boba Fett one because, I just like reading about Boba Fett because I feel like the characterization is just a lot better than what they're doing right now. Because I wasn't a fan of Book of Boba Fett. I didn't even like, I just had problems with it. Which this is not the time to go into that. I was reading this as a lead up to reading The Mandalorian Armor, which is the first of Bounty Hunter Wars. That I'm hopefully going to get to in March because I wasn't able to get to it in February like I wanted. I will say that it also, like with these stories that I think were written in the 90s-ish, they definitely showed their age. I don't know how to specifically narrow that down, like what that means. But like I'm reading it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this feels like 90s. This feels like something that was written before the 2000s for certain. And as I read like Bounty Hunter Wars and some other stuff, I'm gonna have to like try to see if I can pinpoint what about the writing just gives me that vibe. We'll see if I can, but it's a learning opportunity. Next up, we have February. I technically read Prelude of Ashes this month, but I talked about it in Touch of Light. So I really only read like 4 books this month. And this month being February, because as I stated before, the month I'm filming this in right now is March. Last month isn't precisely accurate. So, February. Let's talk about the 3 full-length novels that I read in February, because I had a little bit of a slumpy month. The first one is Widow's House by Daniel Abraham. Book 4 of The Dagger and Coin. There's only so much I can say. But I'll try to say what I can say without spoilers, because I definitely have thoughts. I think so far this has been my favorite book, right? So earlier in this video, I was talking about how there was this huge shift at the end of the 3rd book, right? This huge event that shifted a bunch of things. And it really didn't shift that much. I think it feels a lot more natural, like looking back on some of the foreshadowing, looking back on just how this book fulfills some of that foreshadowing, and how said event kind of intersects with the specific event that I was talking about midway through the book with Marcus's storyline that kind of grounded it. It still remains very grounded in my opinion, right? Like I think it still definitely has like this Game of Thrones, except you have the bank as a huge player in all of this. And you have these spider priests as a huge player in all of this, right? It still gives me that vibe. I do think that the improvements that this event has made in Marcus specifically have been great. I think Marcus was kind of a meh character before this, and now he's a good character, I think, with what Daniel Abraham has done to him in this book. Getter, same old. He's really well-written character, and he's just being himself. That's great. It's frustrating. It makes me angry because he's just a well-written character. Sithrin, Clara, wonderful in this book. I will say that there's a financial scheme that is hatched in this book that is very typical of fantasy. That I had some, I think this is the book where I'm like, I've seen this scheme happen in fantasy like 3 or 4 times. Is this the only banking scheme that people know? And it's a scheme that kind of pokes fun at our modern day banking stuff as well. And I'm like, I've seen this a lot. This is getting tiresome. That being said, it was still my favorite book. It was good. Looking forward to finishing it up in March, which I will definitely do. And then hopefully after that, I might do a live show. I probably will do a spoiler review if I can find the time. Next up, after Widow's House, we have City of Last Chances by Adrian Tchaikovsky, which is right there. I made sure to turn I think you can see the cover. I could be wrong. I'd have to check. But it's also here. But like the camera and then this picture right here don't do it justice. Trust me. It's a pretty cover. And there's tiny little bits and pieces of it that are nice and gold and shiny that like the camera can't pick up very well. But it's really cool. This book is, I don't say probably, this book is my favorite Tchaikovsky novel that I've read, right? And I'm going into this like having heard what a bunch of people have said about it, I'm like, probably going to really like this, right? So, one, you have an abstract, do I want to call it frame? Yeah. So this is a multi-POV book, right? And when I say multi-POV, I mean multi, right? The main character of this book is the city. So there's the abstract main character, question mark. So it skips throughout the city at going to various people that are all tied together in some way, shape, or form, showing you the state of the city, showing you the different sides to the events as they happen. It basically reads like a bunch of short stories that are happening one right after the other. There are POVs that are revisited, so you continue those character arcs and stuff like that. So it's not like it's devoid of book-long character development. But again, like it's about how the city changes with these events, and it's really, really cool. Major themes of this book: rebellion and what it takes to rebel. There's a lot of rebellious factions within this city that has been occupied by the occupiers, who have things like the Office of Correct Speech, and they want to perfect the world in the image. Like it's really, like, there's a little bit of like heavy-handedness here. Like Adrian Tchaikovsky is like, hi, these guys are bad. They're like, you know what? We formed the perfect society, and we want to share it with everybody else through conquest, which we recognize is imperfect, but we're going to perfect everybody else eventually. It's actually kind of funny to me. And it's really interesting because there's an entirely another society that he mentions in the book that is like perfectly efficient, right? And there's actually, you can actually like see a little bit of contrast between like the perfect expansionary society, perfect. Let me air quotes that, perfect, that the occupiers have, and then this other perfectly efficient society of wizards and whatnot is mentioned and explored a little bit within one character's viewpoint. And there's a lot of tiny, really cool details, and the history of the city is explored and how the history has changed over time, and that is contrasted with how the city is changing now, how similar, how different, what's going to come of everything. All the different factions are contrasted in ways that they're prepared, ways that they're not prepared, what they can do, what their history with the city is. There's so many cool things in this book, and I loved it. It's just really good book. Yeah, it's just really good. And then the final book that I read this month, big difference, was Dragonwing by Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I think I got the orders of those names right. It might be Tracy Weiss and Margaret Hickman, but I'm pretty sure it's the first one because Tracy is the dude. Margaret is definitely, yeah, it's Margaret. Yeah, Margaret Weiss and Tracy Hickman. I'm like 80% sure that's the right order. Dragonwing, first book in the Deathgate cycle. I'm kind of reading this with a few people. I know Andrew's Wizardly Reads is reading it, as well as Alan from the Library of Alexandria. And it's good, right? This feels less cringy to me than the Dragonlance books that I've read by them, which I was like, this is decent. It's okay. But this I felt was significantly less cringy. There are definitely cringy parts in here. Trust me. Like, whew. If you marry me, you marry darkness. There's some things in this book that I'm like, wow, right? Part of it is also I'm able to laugh at the cringe a little bit more rather than expecting like amazing modern day writing from it. Maybe that's the thing with Tales of the Bounty Hunters, is there was some things in there that I was just cringing at. And that's really what was making it feel like 90s, 80s writing. The main character, Haplo, is really, really interesting. Like the perspective, like he's sent into these realms to cause chaos, to foment rebellion. And this is like, I would expect this of a book that I've read recently. I don't know why. This would be really interesting to like see how different things, but like, anyways, this is not like the typical story that I would expect of the time that this was written. And it's really interesting because of that. And the world of air that this takes place in, fascinating. The map in it, utterly fascinating. I loved it. Just the world and everything. And water scarcity was an issue, and there's these people that built this society that are not part of the society now, that have gone, and then Haplo is trying to overthrow them, but are they still here? It's just, I think there's a lot going on in this book. I enjoyed just exploring the societies and the world. Like, this is definitely a world-based book. Definitely continuing. I think I have all 7 question mark in hardcover, so I'm gonna continue with that. And that's it. That's all of them. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it. Let me know if you have read these books and what you liked about them, or if you want to read them more now. Hint, hint, City of Last Chances. You should go read it because it's great. I'm going to sign off now. Everybody make sure to get some rest, because that is super important. And rest will be a while away from me, because it is not 11:30 now or 12:30, whatever. It is actually a reasonable hour. Have a great day. Have a great night. Whatever time of whatever day it is. And cool. Bye.